Welcome, fellow truth seekers, to Paranormal M. Subscribe and enable notifications to stay updated on our thought-provoking stories that explore the mysteries of the unknown. Enjoy the exploration. The Pool Boy. I was possessed and controlled. I always hated the house on Pond Street, ever since the first moment I saw it from the outside. It gave off a creepy energy that left a knot in my heart. Inside, it was full of 6-foot mirrors. Every single room had something off about that I couldn't really pinpoint accurately. The only room that gave me a relief from this feeling was the bathroom in the downstairs efficiency apartment. I'd use it often. Every time I walked into the house through the back middle door, I'd feel like someone was watching me through the wall-hanging quilt. There was also a sense of annoyance and frustration emanating from the covered mirror, as if the lurker's view was blocked. A few times at night in my bedroom, I saw figures in the mirrors on the closet. There was a man wearing a top hat, standing in the middle of the room. A tall guy rocked in a glider in the corner of the room, next to the closet mirrors. I didn't have a gliding rocker in my bedroom. The highlight of living in this house was having the pool, at least in the summer. Something lurked in and by the pool that wasn't happy. The pool was dreadful during the winter months. We moved to this house in the fall and couldn't play in the pool immediately. Since the first moment I noticed the pool, I could tell there was a strange, eerie energy hanging around it. The pool and the surrounding pool deck looked strange and eerie. It was inviting and comfortable more than anything, though, but never exactly comfortable. From the very beginning, I felt there was a little boy with weird, evil intentions. He didn't want to hurt anyone, but at the same time, he wanted to hurt someone. Whenever he pleased, it seemed. I dismissed the energy as electrical impulses, maybe from the pump and filter. I later realized I was wrong, very wrong. During the first summer, while I was only in the pool once, I swam to the bottom of the deep end. About 12 feet. I was on the other side of the pool where the floor filter was. I felt a slight tug on my leg. It felt like somebody skimmed against it. Freaked me out, but I thought nothing of it. Thought it must have just been some sort of debris. But my opinion changed during the winter. When the pool was closed up and covered with snow, I was drawn to it. There were several instances where I'd go outside to make a snowman or a fort, maybe sled down the hill on the side yard, but I did these things, yeah, but I'd also have to frequently check the pool. I would have to stand on the pool deck at the edge, overlooking where the deep end drops off. Just look. Sometimes I'd see the top of a little boy's head up and down beneath the ice. Sometimes I'd be by the pool and I'd have no recollection of opening the gate or walking into the area. One time, a cold day in January, I found myself by the pool. Just as I realized I didn't remember getting there, I had a sudden urge to check the strength of the ice by standing on it. The conflicting voice of logic told me not to, and I didn't. At least I thought I hadn't. Next thing I knew, seconds later in a trance, I found myself stepping down into the ice. All the while I'm thinking, this is how I'm gonna die. I'm going to be like 11 years old and I'm going to get trapped under ice in my pool. I tried to resist, but I couldn't. My heart's pounding. As I'm standing on the ice, I managed to turn around. I tried to step up on the back deck, but I'm paralyzed. I'm terrified. I don't want to die, I thought. I heard an extremely faint, almost inaudible crack beneath the snow-covered ice as I plummeted into the icy water below. Instantly after that, the trance lifted, and I pulled myself out. I plummeted waist deep. I wasn't cold, but I felt shook. I actually questioned if I'd actually fallen in. Wet ski pants were the validation. I couldn't get the boy out of my head. As I went about my evening, the boy was on my mind. It was confusing. A chilling thought popped into my head. Is Pond Street named after a long-gone pond? Did a boy drown in the pool? Is there a mirror world where a boy did drown in the pool? The boy in the mask, so vivid, was it more than just a dream? This was a dream that was very vivid and very real. A month later, and it's still disturbing me. On an evening a few days before Thanksgiving in 2019, my wife and I went to bed fairly early in hopes to get some much-needed sleep before our 1-month-old son wakes up for a bottle. I fell asleep fairly quickly. I dreamt that I was in a dark gray night scene. It was a landscape similar to downtown Bangor, Maine, against the waterfront and surrounding land. But there were no cars parked in the street. There might have been a few stray cars, but for the most part, none parked anywhere. I'm apparently walking home, although I don't know how I got downtown, and I was having difficulty finding out where the bridge to Brewer was. In the eerie gray, everything looked too much alike. I walked a bit and realized that I was going the wrong way. So I circled around in place and chose another direction and walked a little then. Soon realizing that I still wasn't in the right direction, I circled again and chose a different one. And my scenery seemed to be making sense. I was relieved. It was a long walk home, but at least I was on my way. Just as quickly as I was relieved, I was nervous again. I was being followed. I looked around. I couldn't see anyone. And just as I began to relax, thinking it was nothing, a kid wearing black with a gray mask over his face and a hoodie with a hood over his head walked beside, then in front of me in a weird motion, like a curling walk. I stopped walking. He tilted his masked head one way then the other. He lifted his right fist up, the index finger, the only finger not locked in a fist. He lifted his other hand in the same way and used an index finger to purposefully point the index finger of his right. He curled backwards a few steps, walked forwards, then disappeared somewhere behind me. Glad he was gone. I continued to find my way home. That's when I realized the bridge into Brewer didn't exist and that I was trapped in Bangor. I found myself disoriented in a parking lot, and I couldn't figure out how or which one it was. I thought maybe the wing lot where I parked my car when I go to work. But I could see Hollywood Slots, the casino in the close distance, so that didn't make sense. It was also weird. I noticed the parking lot that I was in had a road going through it. Then it occurred to me that I was not in a parking lot, but smack in the middle of the road. It was like I was in a video game where the rest of the map hadn't been unlocked yet. This location inconsistency helped me realize that it was a dream, and I was done with it. I told myself to wake up. It wasn't easy. As much as I tried to wake up, I couldn't. So I figured since now that I knew it was a dream, I could gradually wake myself up. As I should be in a lucid dream state, I continued to walk around. The boy in the mask appears. Just appears. No warning, right in front of me. He has a pocket knife in his right hand. The short blade is exposed to the air. He signals the number 1 with his left index and then brings his hand closer to his chest and cuts his index finger with the blade. Beads of blood ooze out and fall into his shirt sleeve. He puts his bleeding finger to his masked mouth. Shh! I can hear faintly. Fed up, I tried to wake myself up to no avail. Walk around again, saying to myself, "This is a dream. I'm dreaming. Wake up. I'm dreaming. Wake up." It wasn't long before a masked kid appeared again. I attempted to walk away from him. He wouldn't let me pass, so I decided to run away. He remained in front of me, refusing to let me through. We ended up face to face, circling each other, All the while, I'm trying to wake up and try to get away from this creepy kid. No matter what I do, I can't escape. As we circle each other, he cuts his index finger and then puts it into his mouth. When I hear the faint shh, he does it all over again. I'm done. This is fucked. Wake up, Paul. I demand myself. No luck. The masked kid disappears again. Wake up, Paul. I demand myself again. No luck. Maybe if I avoid to acknowledge the presence of the masked kid when I see him again, I thought. I continue to walk around, hoping I just wake up. The masked kid appears again. I don't acknowledge I see him. I just keep walking. All the while, he remains directly in front of me. As much as I deny the fact that I don't see him in actuality, I do, and I can't ignore him. He seems to thrive on the fact that I can't ignore him, too. He proceeds to cut his index finger as the blood rolls down his finger and into his sleeve. He puts the bloody finger to his masked lips, shh, again faintly, and he mutters. I began to chant, I need to wake up, as we circle each other as before. He repeatedly cuts his finger and then puts it to his face. Shh, he mutters quietly. We repeated this cycle several times. Suddenly in the background, I hear a baby's whimper. It sounded a lot like my son Matthew. I knew it was. I need to wake up, I yell. The masked kid puts his bloody finger to his mouth, shakes his head, no, and says, shh. In the same typical fashion, we continue to circle. I continually tell myself to wake up. Meanwhile, my baby whimpers are getting louder in the background and starting to sort of sound like it's beginning to cry. As we continue to circle, my wife Katie nudges me. Paul, can you feed Matthew? I finally woke up and I'm laying in bed. I can see my bedroom. Yep, I replied sleepily. Then I'm dragged back to the dream, circling again. Matt needs me, I said to the kid. He shakes his head. No. Katie nudges me. Can you feed Matthew? Yep, I reply. I can see my bedroom again. I'm in bed. As I try to get out of bed, I find myself being pulled back into the dream. I resist with all that I can. I shook my head to wake up and force myself out of bed. I'm on my feet in the bedroom. I touch the dresser next to me to make sure. I'm awake. I walk around our then queen bed to pick up Matthew, who's crying in his bassinet. I'm so relieved I'm awake. I take him to the kitchen to get a bottle, heat it up, and give it to him in the living room. This was the most vivid dream I've ever had. I haven't been able to get it out of my mind since. It was more like a nightmare. I could smell, I could touch. Walking in those circles was tiring. Was this nightmare more than just a nightmare? Mount Hope Cemetery, the very same one that Stephen King mentions in his books, and the one that he cameos on the Pet Sematary. Day and night, Mount Hope Cemetery is always unsettling. Every time I pass by it, I always feel like I'm being watched. Most of the time, it's an easy feeling to brush off. But there are 3 instances where I've been shook to the core. The first. I was in 4th grade. My whole class went on a field trip to the cemetery. From the very beginning when it was brought up, I expressed my lack of interest in going. But I was the only one not showing enthusiasm. So I knew then that it was going to happen, and I dreaded it, hoping that my teacher would decide to cancel the trip. I wasn't allowed to skip school as a kid, so I never even asked. I went to the cemetery with my class. They were all having a wonderful time, and I was immersed in vibes that were making me kind of sick to my stomach. We were told to make rubbings on paper with crayon of at least 3 gravestones that caught our eyes. I didn't want to, but I did anyway, and while I'm rubbing these gravestones, I felt like I was stepping on the toes of someone, and that maybe I was even bothering someone. I managed to rub 2. The third I picked. My crayon was still in my left hand. I grabbed a piece of paper from the pile near me. When I knelt down to begin rubbing it, I had an overwhelming feeling of anger wash over me, and I stopped dead. For a second, I couldn't move. This gravestone didn't want to be rubbed. I tried to talk reason to myself. It's a 117-year-old, old, rotted corpse. It can't possibly be anything. To no avail. I could have forced myself to rub this one, but I decided that wasn't the best. I didn't rub a third one. I couldn't get myself to do it. It freaked me out. I said it out loud to someone in particular. Well, I guess no one in particular, that there's something wrong with this grave. It doesn't... And I stopped talking. I wasn't really comfortable talking about the experience to anyone around me. I knew they wouldn't have believed me anyway. I know what I felt, and it wasn't peaceful. If I rubbed that grave, someone or something would have attached to me, and it would have been nearly impossible to shake off. The second. It was in the summer of 2012. I biked home from work. I worked at Wendy's and lived in, well, this is spelled Veazei. Vizier? Not sure. Sorry. The cemetery was on my right. I looked because I saw someone. I thought it was a dumb teenager doing something stupid. It wasn't. I saw two shadows watching me, one looming over a grave. It had long, creepy fingers and a thick, dark, malevolent energy that seemed to be bent on anger and misery. It must have been an entity of pure evil. The other was a man, a shadow standing right next to it. It was akimbo to the thick tree. His top hat brim remained straight. Even as close as he was to the tree would have bent the brim. He must have been 7 feet tall. The looming one lunged towards me. "Fuck," I yelled. Completely sure I was about to get possessed, the akimbo one flinched. Then they were both gone. I was still myself and relieved, heart pounding, but I was okay. The third. I was biking home again, through Mount Hope. I almost got through the cemetery without seeing anything. Then suddenly 2 lights caught my attention. They were moving crazy fast. One was chasing the other. They crossed the road in front of me. The one lagging behind suddenly pounced. They let go. They both darted past the road on the other side. The moment they began getting smaller, they were gone. Conclusion. Of course, there are times when I can't avoid going past Mount Hope Cemetery. I have sensed other spirits and the like. I just completely downright refuse to acknowledge them, though. There's definitely something sinister about that cemetery. Part of me feels like there might be something there that wants to latch on to me. Story number 4. I do ghost tours. So I do ghost tours in Savannah, Georgia. A great start already. I love paranormal stuff, ghosts, demons, angels, etc., etc. And ever since I've started working here, I've yet to have a tour where something weird hasn't happened. So I have a lot of experiences around this. This one, though, was my very first. So a few months back in August, when I first started working there, we give tours through some homes. And I'm contractually bound to not say where, sorry. But basically super famous homes, and on the second floor of this house there's a nursery. Now a nursery is already super creepy with period dolls and furniture and scares most people, including myself. I'm not scared of the dolls yet, but I'm kind of scared of the kid that lives in there. Oddly enough, there's no evidence or news that a child ever died in this home, but I was told about him by my former coworkers. 3 people have told me that they've caught him on camera on my tour, and one person last week put a name to him. He's a young lad about 8 years old, in a late 1800s nightgown, and with a bowl cut. He's a devious bugger and has been known to turn on people's phone flashes and ringers as well as scare many young kids whose parents don't believe their kid when they say stuff like, "Mommy, can you tell him I don't want to play with him?" Stuff like that. So in August, there was a 3-day stint where he would be caught in a room in different spots. The second night, my friend was on the tour and sent a picture, and he just caught this kid standing in the back peeking over a crib. That isn't what bothered me. What really messed with my head is what happened the following week. The house got a different feel to it. No one liked to be there for too long, and everybody, including myself and my coworkers, noticed it seemed much colder than normal. Note: we contractually cannot touch or alter anything in the house without receiving a massive penalty, a fine, and being fired, which includes the thermostat, obviously. Well, as we all braced ourselves through that week, I got caught up in something I really wish I didn't. As we were moving people to a different room and I was waiting to get the next group into the house, I remembered that my manager had gone to the basement to use the private restroom, and I wanted to make sure that they turned off the downstairs light. So I make my way over to the nook and open the door. There's a woman standing at the bottom of the steps. In the quickest instant, I noticed that she had flowing brown hair and was dressed in a very formal, very 1800s hoop skirt and dress. That was just in a split second, because before my brain could process a response or a greeting, she looked up the stairs at me and her eyes were glowing green, like flashlights through the dark downstairs area. She glared right through me and started running up the stairs. I say running, but more so like flying. Charging right up the stairs, so I slammed the door and booked it out of the house, called my manager to notify him that I needed to just take a break. One shift was over without another hitch. I got to asking around, and 4 separate people told me that I had seen Mary. Again, can't give the full name, sorry. As fate would have it, Mary died in that home and had quite a few children, not all of whom are fully documented for. They proceed to explain that since infant mortalities were so high, it was very possible many kids were unaccounted for, thus leading to a possible explanation for the kid upstairs. My major issue then is, why did she come after me? Story number 5. I do ghost tours, part 2. So someone talked about the Telfair Mansion. I'll call it a mansion, a museum and a house. And Mary Telfair herself. And as I've come to find out, she might hate me. I've tried to go in there and look around, at the top museum collection a few times. And I step in and I immediately feel like either A, someone is screaming into both of my ears, or B, someone is pounding a brick against my skull. So I just don't go near there too often if I can help it, especially not at night. On the same token, the building is beautiful, absolutely amazing. Unconfirmed, but I'm pretty sure that when she was she was considered basically the last of her family line. Her wealth rivaled that of the Rockefeller and Vanderbilt. Like filthy rich, And there's a lot of superstition surrounding her will. Allegedly, in her will, she demanded that female actors never be allowed near the home, and some other things I don't need to get into. You can read her will on their website. The website, you can type in the Telfair's will. Anyway, on to my experience. So back in early September, I was about to leave Savannah for a bit, and I decided to drive the tour one more time late at night with my then girlfriend. So we're driving around and get to the Telfair Square, where we both get really quiet. We both feel like something's up, but neither of us says anything. So I pull over in the square adjacent to the mansion and start just looking around, trying to get the jovial mood back. She's on her phone when I look over to the museum. That's when I see it. A woman is standing next to the building, arms crossed, glaring at me. I'm used to getting odd glances, but she was shooting daggers through my skull, metaphorically, thankfully. And I, looking back, was staring right through her, literally. She was opaque, and standing behind her is a shadow, tall and only identifiable between the literal darkness, and it's kind of like a purple-like outline that kept flowing around it. Like liquid darkness. Red eyes slanted and like some demonic entity pulled out of a movie. And the moment this happens, my girlfriend, looking up from her phone, just says, "Drive," in this super concerned voice. So I do, because I don't want to stick around. I peel out of the square and it feels like we're being chased. She couldn't see anything, but it felt like we were surrounded by sort of just a darkness trying to close in on all sides. And the red eyes blinked in and out of my rear view. Best idea was to not stop. That's when she starts spilling out directions. Simple. Turn here, next right, go. Simple stuff, but all the super concerned and rhythmic like a GPS without a destination. Just an escape route. We travel halfway across the city before the feeling begins to fade. We both start panting as if we've been running for our lives. There is no safe feeling between us. We're scared. We find a safe, well-lit spot, and we sort of debrief. So I say what I saw, and she said that she suddenly did not feel safe. So, somewhat on the same page. Neither of us knows what happened, and this wasn't the first time that she's felt that way and told me to drive. This was the first time, however, where I saw something. I don't know what happened or what I did to upset anyone near that house, but I still make a point to never travel around the city, especially near Telfair Square alone. The Lady in Pink. Many years ago, I was in college. I lived with my brother off and on. The house had a downstairs with a living room, dining room, kitchen, and a master bedroom, and an upstairs with the kids' rooms on one side, a bathroom on the other, and a bit of space in between the front of the stairs. It really wasn't big enough to be called a room, but it wasn't exactly a hallway. They set up a futon for me, and that became my area. I remember thinking that the upstairs felt a little off, especially my niece's room. After a few months, I started sleeping on the couch downstairs. Partly because the kids would disturb me in the morning, but also because I never felt right up there. There were several strange things that happened while I lived there. One night, my brother, sister-in-law, niece, nephew, and I were at the table eating dinner. From upstairs, we heard one of my niece's talking dolls say something like, "I want to play with you." Excuse my attempt. It sounded like a horror movie cliche bullshit, I know, but it was extremely unsettling when it happened in real life. No one else was in the house, and they didn't have any pets. Another time, my niece was coming down the stairs when she fell suddenly. I remember thinking it was really strange because it didn't look like she tripped. It was more like she'd been pushed. Her necklace had broken during her fall, but not at the clasp. The string had just broken like someone yanked it off. Then one night while I was sleeping upstairs, I woke up and felt really uneasy. I think it was around 2 or 3 in the morning. Since the kids' rooms were across from the bathroom, they had to walk through my area to get to one another. I opened my eyes and saw what looked like somebody in a pink bathrobe go into the bathroom. I didn't recall my niece having a pink bathrobe, so I thought it was, just kind of strange. After a while, when no lights had switched on and I didn't hear the sink or the toilet flushing, I started to get up to see if anybody was in there, but I got this really bad feeling that I should just leave it alone. In the morning, I asked my niece if she had a pink bathrobe, and I asked both my niece and nephew if either of them had gone to the bathroom in the middle of the night. They all said no. Sometime later, I mentioned the whole thing to my sister-in-law. She asked me if my brother had told me to say that. I was confused and said, "No, why?" She told me that when they had first moved in, she kept having this dream that there was a lady in a pink bathrobe sitting in the living room. They kept telling her to leave, but she wouldn't. Then one night she dreamed that the lady was in the doorway of her room screaming and then flew at her and started choking her. Ah, thank you, Bug. Excuse me. A while after all this had happened, my sister-in-law went around the house saying, "Okay, lady, I know you're here." Then she had the dream of moving again, and this time they put the boxes all around her instead of telling her to leave. I moved out shortly after, but the incidents mostly stopped after that as far as I know. My sister-in-law said that they just had to learn to live with her. Someone came to say Merry Christmas from the other side. My brother and I have different dads. Unfortunately, his dad passed away a year prior to when this story is set. My mom and his dad didn't do well together. He wasn't a bad guy, just troubled and really didn't know how to be a good partner. My mom said that after they separated and she met my dad and got pregnant with me, my brother's dad said, "You finally got the girl you always wanted." This was something that she had told him when they were together, that she always wanted a daughter, but obviously they didn't stay together to have another kid. When I was little, he was always really sweet to me, not in a creepy way, just always interested in asking how I am. My mom said that she felt like he always felt drawn to me, maybe because he regretted the end of the relationship with her, and I in some way made him think that he could, who knows. Okay, so moving on to the story. A few weeks after my brother's dad died, I had a dream that I was in the hallway with him. He told me that he was okay and that he wanted to show me something. He grabbed a door handle, opened the door, and the brightest light came through, but then I woke up. I so wish I could remember what he showed me, or if he did show me anything at all. So now fast forward in time. It was Christmas Eve of 2009, a year later. I was upstairs in my bedroom and I heard music playing. We had a room next to mine with all kinds of toys because I had a lot of nieces and nephews that came over. I assumed the music was coming from there, so I walked into the room to check. It was not coming from that room, and I realized it was coming from the bathroom. The bathroom? Odd, I thought. I went in there and realized the music was coming from a 3-tier box, each tier with a drawer where my mom kept jewelry and other keepsakes. As soon as I touched the box, the music abruptly stopped. I was 21 at this time, and in all the years of living with my parents, I've never heard music come from this box. And she had it my entire life. I go downstairs and tell the weirdest thing that just happened to my mom, and I tell her this whole story. Her face goes completely white. She looks totally freaked out and her eyes well up with tears. She then tells me that this is a jewelry box that her ex-husband, my brother's dad who died, gave her on their wedding day. She said it hasn't played music in 35 years because it broke. We even went upstairs to try to recreate the music and get it to work, but no luck. I just smiled and shrugged and said, "Well, I guess he's saying Merry Christmas." I don't know why he chooses me to go through for all these messages. We weren't close, but I do think part of it is that he just knows I won't brush things off as my brain is kind of weird. I feel that they're from him and he knows I'll share the message. My brother pretty much hasn't been very receptive to the messages, and I don't want to make him uncomfortable or upset him. The casual haunting. That friend of mine has a fellow student who comes from an old and noble family in the North Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. And they own a rather large and old estate, built a few generations ago where the family lived ever since. He moved to his university city a few hundred kilometers away and only stays at the family house over the holidays and a couple of nights a year. One of those times, his parents left for a weekend and he was the only one home. Spent the evenings in the living room watching TV. The living room was the heart of the estate with an open fireplace and posh furniture. He was sitting in an old armchair that he knew was older than himself and maybe even his parents. The armchair stood freely in the room facing the TV so that the closed living room's doors were in his back. Oops. As you might have imagined, we now come to the ghost part of the story, as he heard clearly audible footsteps coming from the parquet floors in the lobby downstairs. He turned the TV off and tried listening closely when he heard them again. He knew he was the only one home and thought of intruders. Maybe somebody saw his parents leave and wasn't assuming anybody would be home, since he had moved out a couple of years prior. He got up, went downstairs, turned on all the lights, checked the locked front door, searched the kitchen and the downstairs bathroom. No sign of intrusion, nor any more steps. Relieved, he made his way back to the living room and continued watching TV. After some time, the footsteps left his mind. After all, it was an old house, and he wasn't used to the noises anymore. Then, after some time, he felt what he described as a chilliness suddenly filling the room as if brought in by a light breeze. Once he noticed it, that he was for sure it hadn't been there before, then the footsteps reappeared, but this time right behind him, between the door and the back of the armchair, sounding as if it was approaching him. He turned around hastily, only to find an empty room. The footsteps had disappeared, took the chilliness with them. Nothing more happened that night, but the eerie feeling remained. It wasn't ghosts per se that he was afraid of, but he couldn't explain what he had experienced. The next morning, he tried to casually mention the weird experiences to his father on the phone. His father wasn't surprised or incredulous, quite the contrary. He told him to call the priest, as it was probably, quote-unquote, just his grandfather wanting to sit in his armchair and wasn't able to because it was occupied. Apparently his father used to be calling the priest every now and then, just to speak a blessing and put the souls to rest. And they experienced steps, noises, or chilliness a couple of times a year that stop after the priest is visited. They had been doing this even while he was still living at the home and never told him, never really scared him either. His father apologized for not thinking about that before leaving for the weekend, but nothing had happened over the 10 or so months that he simply kind of forgot, as he was so used to that casual haunting. The light on the lake. My dad's bought an old house. It's a homestead from the 1840s in rural Nova Scotia. It has been a ski resort, a bed breakfast, a farm, an artist retreat, and a wood mill on the property until the 1960s. It has a very long history, and many people in the community are familiar with the house and the lakefront property that it sits on. Locals have told us how much the place meant for them, and told us stories about the owner of the house between 1971 and 2004. This guy was proper loved in the community and used to let the community children swim the lake. The house isn't on the lake. The house sits on a steep hill over the lake. It's about 200 feet in elevation change and 300 feet between the lake and the house. One winter, brother and sister wanted to play on the ice, so they asked the owner of the property if they could. The owner said no, but they were welcome to walk down to the shore of the lake. The sister was fine enough with this answer, but the brother decided that he wanted to do what he had done a month ago when the ice was thicker. He decided he would toboggan down the entire hill, onto the gravel, and then onto the ice. A popular stunt many kids have done before, but never in late February or March. With the sister begging him not to, he slid down the hill, across the gravel, and onto the ice. The ice along the shore was strong enough to hold his weight, but he slid further and further until he slowed over the thin enough ice to break from underneath him. Firefighters failed to find him for hours until he was found by the shore underneath the ice. It's unknown if he was trying to swim to shore while trapped underneath or floated that way. Shortly after my dad moved, I was in one of the guest rooms that looked over the lake. It was a June evening, and the world was filled with the sound of small frogs trying to fuck. I was admiring the view from the window when I saw light over the lake. The sun had been down for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Only orange and blue haze was left around the horizon. As I looked over the lake, I saw a small light moving quickly around it. I assumed it was a reflection of some sort, but it caught my eye enough to watch. It was darting, and it was darting seemingly at random points, quickly stopping and continuing again in a new direction. I thought it may have been a bird or a group of moths. It was dark. All I knew is that I saw this thing and it was strange, and I remembered it. This was long before I knew what had happened on the lake. A couple of months later, and I'm back at my dad's house with some family, and over drinks the topic of witnessing paranormal activity came up. People shared stories, and eventually I talked about the light on the lake. My dad's significant other begins grilling me with questions about how the light moved and so on, and she claims to have seen these lights as well. My dad would see the light on the lake a few weeks after. A close cousin sees it a few weeks after that. We would go on to share theories about the light that darts across the ice for a while. A couple of months go by and my dad's at a neighbor's house. The neighbor also lives on the lake. They were telling my dad about all the stories about the lake, pretty much a detailed account of everything that took place at that lake in the past 40 years. And eventually the story about the kid who drowned came up. As the husband finished telling my dad about the story, the wife said something to the effect of, "Me and my mom have been seeing a light over the lake occasionally since that day." They then had a long conversation about witnessing paranormal activity. The two experiences in the same house. Both of these stories took place 7 to 8 years ago, but I still remember them vividly. They both took place at my grandma's house, which always creeped me, my siblings, and cousins out when we were younger. My parents have told me that they even found the house creepy, like someone was watching them, but didn't want to scare us kids. Both events aren't that big, but I figured I'd share them anyway. One night, me and my cousins were up late at night playing video games, probably 2 or 3 a.m. Of course, we got hungry and wanted to make some pizza rolls, so we sneaked by our grandmother's room. She didn't like us being up late. And now we decide who's going to go downstairs first. To paint the scene, it's pitch black, like can't see your hand 2 inches from your face black. And we were a little scared, so my cousins forced me to go down the stairs first. Since it's so dark, I'm slowly going down as I don't want to fall down. I also couldn't tell when I reached the bottom because the stairs and the floor were both made out of the same wood. So when I reached the bottom, I took a few more cautious steps forward just to make sure. That's when I bumped into something taller than me that felt like when you run into a person taller than you. It completely stopped me in my tracks. I looked up and I see this figure right in front of me move to the left. And remember, it's pitch black. And at the same time, one of my cousins turns on the light. And there I am, standing in the middle of the living room with nothing around me. They, of course, saw nothing, and I found it more creepy that something was probably just watching us walk down the stairs. The second story takes place in a very similar scenario, except I'm the only one with one of my cousins this time. We sneak downstairs to grab a bite to eat around 2 or 3 a.m. He's eating some cereal and we're chilling at the dining room table sitting across from each other. I'm talking while he's mainly focused on eating. Then there's this loud growl next to my left ear which freezes both of us. I look at him and slowly say, "Dude, did you hear that shit?" He nods. Then we both start laughing. Probably because we didn't know what else to do. The race to get upstairs once the lights were out was full of panic. I occasionally bring up the second story with the cousin who was there, and he still remembers exactly like I do, so I know I'm not imagining it. poker set. 4 years ago, my uncle passed away. He was only 60, had the kindest soul. He would call me all the time and tell me that he wanted to take me to the casino when I got old enough. Unfortunately, he never got the chance to, as at the time of passing I was 20. The beginning of January is my birthday. On the 10th of December of 2016, my family and myself laid him to rest. We were all pretty sad about it, but in good spirits. We laid him to rest with all of his favorites: whiskey, some sweets, an entire pack of cards. We placed them in his hands, a full ace, and said our final goodbyes. At the time, I lived in South Philadelphia for school. The morning after, I was expecting an Amazon delivery of Christmas presents for my girlfriend at the time. So I went into the kitchen to wait for the package that was supposed to be delivered soon. Taking a look out the window, I noticed the weather. I remember it vividly being a wet, rainy morning. Fog was in the air and you could see maybe 20 feet in front of you. Definitely an odd vibe given the time of the year. Decided to take a quick look on my step. The package wasn't delivered yet, but I looked down and saw this small wooden box sitting on my doorstep. I had no idea what it was, so I took it inside to sit on my kitchen table to get a look. I open it up and I see the box. I was absolutely speechless. I looked it over around the house to make sure nobody was playing a weird joke on me. I then noticed that both sets of cards were gone. This could either be an odd coincidence or something else at play. The reason why it's so odd is because I've absolutely no idea why somebody would be walking around with this in South Philly and, out of all people, leave it on my step. All of my roommates were gone for the day, so it had to have happened after they left. Also, in South Philly, you can't really leave stuff on your step or porch unless you want to get rid of it. Told all my family about it, and they were all just as weirded out as I was. I took the set back to my grandparents' house, where he lived at the time that he died. As soon as I set it down on the table, it all of a sudden looked not as pristine. It could have been the light, but as soon as I went to go move it for dinner, it fell apart in my hands, like the glue from the box all of a sudden dried up in my hands and no longer became of use. I don't know whether or not this counts as a ghost story, or if this even counts as an encounter, but it definitely was one of the weirdest experiences I've ever encountered. Nothing like that's ever coincidentally lined up in my life like that. My first supernatural experience. When I was in high school, I worked at the Boy Scout camp in the Buffalo National River. It was a summer camp and high school adventure outpost, and I spent 2 summers working there. The summers of 14 and a month in the summer of 15. When I started working there, older staff members started telling me stories of how haunted the camp and the trails that gave access to across the Buffalo River were. Things like children laughing in the distance, blood-curdling screams coming from deep in the woods, a haunted cabin across the river, and a slew of others. For lack of a better term, we could call them campfire stories. Me, being a total skeptical of all this, brushed it off, and nearly the entirety of the first summer saw or heard nothing out of the ordinary. The only odd thing I saw the whole summer was lightning bugs, one by one turning red near the mouth of a trail leading to the river, until all the lightning bugs you could see in that direction were flashing a sort of sickly red color. This is something that multiple people I worked with had told me happened, and it didn't really scare me. It was more of a feeling of bewilderment and curiosity, but once again, I thought little of it. Before I get into the experiences I had the next summer, I think giving a brief overview of how the camp was laid out would be helpful. As I said before, the camp sat on one side of the river with a large empty field running along the campside of the river, used for various activities beyond this field. The land rose up in the hills and the bluffs, and trails led up the hill, To the center of the camp, where the mess hall and trading post were located, as well as the camp offices and trails led up and down from the centralized location to the campsites, and they spread in every direction from the mess hall. Across the river from the trail leading down from the field, you could see the ford of the river and cross multiple hiking trails and led up to the camp's penultimate hike, Antenna Pine. Never heard that term, penultimate. Which 3.5 miles up rested atop a ridge, and the namesake pine could be seen from the camp itself. The first experience that was truly strange at the camp was the second weekend that I'd been there in the summer of 15. A friend of mine that I worked with there, we're going to call M, had told me stories of a moonshiner who used to work near the camp. He told me that a still was out there, and he wanted to go find it. Given it was our day off and a beautiful summer day, I jumped on the opportunity to hike. We head out of the camp, crossed the river, and carried on up the trail. We ran across a group of high adventure staff and asked them, I don't know if they were high or if that's a thing, but moving on. We asked one of them that we knew fairly well if they possibly had shit. This is written crazily. We ran across a group of high adventure staff and asked one of them we knew fairly well if he had heard of a still in the surrounding area. He immediately answered yes and pointed directly off the trail to our right, telling us that we would run into a creek in the woods out that way and to follow it away from the camp until we came onto a rock outcropping in a creek. Having the directions we needed, we stepped off the trail about half a mile from the river, and within about a minute, we found the aforementioned creek. We turned up the creek and followed it away from the river for about 20 minutes until we saw it. A rock bluff no more than 5 feet high and about a 20-foot opening. However, the entirety of the mouth of this bluff had a handmade rock wall built into it with a small door about 4 feet in height and a small window and vent for the still about 8 inches by 8 inches. We were blown away. I can remember it being one of the coolest things I've ever found in the woods, and after we both crawled inside, we found it empty, with the exception of some thin copper tubing and a couple of mash pans that were deteriorated greatly. We hung around for another 5 minutes or so investigating the place and noticed trails leading off in opposite directions that we had come in. Not well-made trails, but more like the type created by deer. I noticed this, and then my friend seemed convinced that they were moonshiner trails. We wanted to follow them and see where they led. Rolling my eyes again to his suggestion of them being hooch runner trails, I followed him. Not having an issue with getting more chance to see nature and enjoy the day, I followed along, looking to the left and right of me as I walked and taking in the view. We followed these trails uphill that ran alongside the creek for probably about a quarter mile before M turned to me and said, "Hey, let's go back to the camp. I don't feel so good." I thought nothing of this, and I turned around. We walked back the way that we had come for probably 10 minutes, and I noticed M, not me, was sweating more than he had been before. He just told me that the sun must be getting to him and kept walking. I had him drink some water, and he seemed normal, albeit quieter than usual. We carried on, and my worry faded as he was walking and breathing normally. As we walked, I continued to look around, and at some point zoned out staring at M's backpack. I eventually ran into the back of M's backpack and was snapped out of my thoughts. I pushed his backpack forward and told him to get moving. No response. I shook his shoulders and asked him if he was okay. All he replied was, "Look." He raised his finger, pointing directly ahead of us. Ahead was the still that we had been at not only half an hour before, and immediately to the right of the door was without a doubt the most blood-chilling thing I'd ever seen. As soon as I'd laid eyes on it, I was hit with the most real sense of dread and fear I've had in my whole life. It was as if I knew I wasn't supposed to be seeing it, and I was paralyzed, frozen still. A black shape stood about 7 inches tall, motionless, Albeit its composition appeared to have some sort of movement within it, it struck me as a shadow at first, and I immediately looked up to see if there was anything that could be casting it. Nothing, just the forest. I looked back quickly and looked at the object for another 5 seconds or so before it started moving. It moved itself directly center of the doorway. It compressed down to the height of the doorway, then rushed in. I think he meant feet. I had thought that this was just a shadow, but when it moved, I could see there was dimensionality to it, and after looking at it for a few seconds, I could make out what seemed to be a thick black smoke within the shape and filling it. It seemingly disappeared as soon as it entered the still, and before I could say a word, M was sprinting back towards the main trail and camp. I rapidly followed him, and neither of us stopped until we reached the river crossing, and we could see other staff across the river. As we sat there catching our breaths, neither said a word. I sat listening and turned towards the woods that we had just come out of, half expecting to hear or see something crashing through the woods behind. It was silent. All I could hear was my own breathing and the sound of the river feet behind me. No birds, no squirrels, no human voices despite staff, and even outsiders using the trails frequently on the weekends. As I was taking my shoes off to go through the river again, Em asked me, "What in the fuck was that thing?" I simply responded with a shrug, not having the nerve to break the silence all around me. I was still hyper-aware of how quiet it was while we were crossing and was almost slammed by the noise I experienced when we finally hit the other side. Birds were chirping all over, the wind was making the leaves on the trees rustle, and the voices of fellow staff members carried through the field normally. M never said anything about the sound, but I honestly think that he was so shaken that he hadn't noticed. I took him to the camp chaplain, who offered to counsel me on what had happened as well, but I didn't want to talk about it. The one time I asked M later about it, he said out of nowhere he had gotten this feeling telling him he needed to leave now. Something primal. A primal feeling, almost like he said. He didn't say anything to me because he thought it was strange too, but had decided he just wanted to leave. I still don't know what I saw that day, but it scared the shit out of me. I had more creepy stuff happen the next week there, and my little brother worked there for 2 summers as well and had some strange stuff happen. If you guys want me to share more of these things that me and my brother have experienced, let me know. I just figured I'd share this one because it was my first paranormal experience, and one of the most vivid and terrifying I've had. More paranormal experiences. The last paranormal event I witnessed at the camp, and coincidentally the last time I've been at said camp, took place about a week after the event I recounted my last experience. Myself and about 4 other staffers were in the lower field, about 75 yards from the mouth of the river trail, enjoying a fire. We had snuck down to smoke cigarettes. While we were sitting there that night, the fireflies around the mouth of the trail were starting to flash red. At first, just a few, then it seemed to be the whole forest in the direction of the river, filled with red flashes. It was somewhat unnerving given what I had seen the week before, but I myself had witnessed these lightning bugs doing this long before that I believed in the paranormal. I smoked another cigarette and joked, just talked and cracked wise about all of our bosses and the way people worked in general. It was just 15 or 16-year-olds doing their thing, lost in conversation for 10 minutes or so. We all failed to notice our friend, who we'll call Kay, standing away from the circle, facing the river trail. I saw her out of the corner of my eye, but just figured she was taken back by the fireflies. She had never seen them or something. About 30 seconds later, I glanced at her and saw her still standing there. I walked over to check on her and noticed her head was tilted slightly upwards, looking up toward Antenna Pine. For those who didn't read my last post, it's a large pine tree that just sits atop a ridge 3.5 miles up from the camp across the river. When standing nearly anywhere with an unobstructed view, you can see the pine from the camp. I followed her gaze up to the pine, and I was blown away. There was what could have been or rather couldn't have been more than 100 feet away from the top of the pine, was a bright red light. At first, I thought it was a rescue helicopter, maybe recovering someone from the top, but there was no sound. We had had rescue helicopters land before in the field that we were standing in, and the way to the bluffs and the valley work along the Buffalo, sound travels extremely far. I also quickly ruled out the rescue helicopter because there were no campers as it was the weekend. The only ones with access to the Antenna Pine Trail are the Boy Scouts, and any time someone goes missing or gets rescued at the camp's property, the camp director is immediately notified, and this never happened. This object orbited above the pine slowly. I was unable to accurately judge the speed, but it was too slow to be a plane. So we sat watching this object for about 7 minutes or so. It would occasionally speed up or down, very gradually, and it wasn't super noticeable. Someone in the group with us then said that he was going to go wake up all the other staffers just to see it and bolt it up to the hill behind us. Almost immediately after my buddy had got up to get more onlookers, the object stopped dead in its tracks about halfway through its orbit of the pine. During the stop, you could make out the cylindrical shape of the object. Shortly before it darts off, almost instantly completely disappearing from sight. We sat out there for another 20 minutes and recounted our story to the few staffers that woke up that believed our buddy. Over these 20 minutes, the fireflies one by one went back to normal, and we all eventually went to bed. I remember being somewhat confused because the last inexplicable thing I witnessed had left me horrified, not even a week before, and then this. There was no dread, fear, wariness, or angst over it, simply a feeling of wonder and bewilderment. I just hope whatever it was enjoyed the view of the buffalo as much as we had been. The next 2 stories are my brothers from the same camp, and the last is my most recent involving the fraternity house that I live in. 2 summers after my spooky experiences there, my little brother decided he too wanted to spend the summer out there. I was fully supportive of this and was excited for him to go. I gave him the normal, "It's haunted over there, you," which he shrugged off. He wasn't quite sure about the paranormal and he'd never really seen anything. However, my parents had told him about his chats with my grandparents after they died when he was a small child recently, so I think it had the gears in his head turning. During his first summer there, he was given the task of guiding our troop on the hike to Antenna Pine. They left late afternoon and reached the top about an hour and a half before sunset. They hung at the top for about 30 minutes admiring the view and then left. On the way down, the troop scoutmaster led the way and my little brother stayed at the end of the group to make sure no kids got lost and he would be sure to be the last one across. He said that as they continued down the mountain, he got the feeling that he was being watched. He chalked it up to the people that he was chaperoning. As he continued this feeling, it sort of stuck and he started to hear footsteps almost matching his. But when he stops and looks back, the footsteps would stop and there was nothing there. Although this creeped him out, he said nothing and just kept moving. I think he made the group move a little faster, reasoning it was about to get dark. They continued back to the camp and my brother said he felt and heard this phenomenon the whole way. And while it was almost entirely muted footsteps on the rock trail he heard behind him, he heard twigs crack a couple of times, and he said this scared him the most. They continued down the ridge and finally reached the ford in the river. My brother said that the feeling here was almost unbearable, and he looked into the woods behind them and saw nothing. Still feeling watched, he slowly took off his shoes and began to cross the ford. Got about halfway across and he said he was compelled to stop and look back. He said that as he did, a large splash of water rose up at the edge of the river like someone had just taken their first step in crossing. My little brother stood paralyzed before members of our troop calling his name snapped him out of it and just ran back across. And by the way, this was in the summer of 2017. The following summer, he and a friend decided to cross the river to the cabin. This cabin was an original homestead cabin from the Boxley Valley and has been reassembled here at the top of a small waterfall in the 90s to act as a living history exhibit for the camp. They did metalworking and several other pioneer crafts. cabin had been abandoned since about 1998. I had heard stories of staffers in this cabin being subject to strange paranormal events, and one of the staffers who had worked in the cabin had a son working with us. Crazy stories, no doubt. Windows and doors slamming, crosses flipping upside down on the wall, pretty standard ghostly story fare. I myself had been there several times, never noticing anything weird, just noting how cool the history behind this thing was. So my little brother and his friend make it to this cabin, and it being a relatively hot day, set their lawn chairs in the creek that feeds the waterfall. On the way up to this cabin, his friend had asked him multiple times if he heard laughing. Well, on the way that he didn't, as he sat there, he said he caught it in earshot from multiple directions the whole time they sat there. However, he never heard it clearly. As they sat there talking, a lull in the conversation left them looking at the area around them. My brother said in this moment he noticed for a split second, and the only thing he could hear was the creek that they were sitting in, and even then he noted it sounded almost muffled, as he realized the most blood-curdling, bloody murder loudest scream he'd ever heard ring out. He said it lasted for a good 3 or 4 seconds, then stopped, but echoed loudly off the walls of the waterfall below. He and his friend were both terrified. His friend literally fell out of his chair into the creek and slowly stood up and approached the edge of the waterfall where they had heard the scream come from and peered down, only to see nothing 30 feet below them. No rustling from an animal or a person running, simply nothing. That was the last time my little brother went across the river, and the next summer he worked at a different camp altogether. The last experience I have to recount is recent, and multiple variations of it have happened over the past 3.5 years. I live in a fraternity house that was built in 1920. It was constructed as the first female housing on our campus and had seen a couple of owners before a fraternity purchased it in 1971. When I moved in the fall of 2018, all the members told me the house was haunted, that Jake would sometimes make himself known. I was, of course, somewhat skeptical, as I thought it was just the older brothers to give me a spook, but the first time I knew Jake existed happened about 3 months after I moved in. Our entire chapter left the house at about 1 a.m. for activities. I ran upstairs after they left and put running shoes on to catch up with them. I sat on my couch and began tying my shoes quickly when a large stomp outside my door scared the shit out of me, followed by footsteps moving away from the door. I stood up and opened the door expecting to yell, "Screw you," at one of the brothers. However, upon opening the door, I saw nothing, just heard footsteps moving away from me down the hallway. I knew someone was there, but I couldn't see a damn thing. The footsteps completely stopped at the wall at the end of the hall, and I just stepped back in my room, locked the doors, and went to bed. I asked my frat brothers the next morning, and they all asked where I had been. I told them what happened and that I thought one of them must have pranked me. They told me that I was the only one there. At first I didn't believe them, but I had literally watched every single one of them leave. The house also has the original hardwood floors throughout, which are by no means quiet. You can hear just about anyone going anywhere in this house, so I'd have heard doors open and stairs creaking, etc. For anybody that's still hanging on there, thanks for listening and sorry for a couple of those mistakes. If you know what that one word means that I couldn't figure out, let me know, because I'm not exactly the opposite of bright, but I certainly don't know every word in the book. So, as always, have a good night. See ya.